You're sitting in a buzzing studio, the lights blinding and the crowd eager, waiting for another fun celebrity interview. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, two of Hollywood's most adored stars, sit next to each other, ready to charm the audience with their usual banter. The host, full of energy, asks a few lighthearted questions and all seems normal. But then Keanu, in a calm yet intense moment, says something that completely catches everyone off guard. It's not the usual celebrity fluff or rehearsed answers. This moment isn't just about laughs or movie promotion. It's raw, powerful, and deeply personal. The host, usually quick with his words, finds himself frozen in complete silence, not knowing how to respond. What Keanu said next would go on to silence the entire room and leave the world watching with a new perspective. This wasn't just an interview, it was a profound lesson in humanity. The sun was setting over the city, casting a warm golden hue that seemed to filter through the studio's large windows. Inside, the energy was high, and the atmosphere was filled with excitement. Cameras rolled as Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock sat side by side on a sleek set, designed to make both celebrities feel comfortable and at ease. The stage was lit with soft, flattering lights that gave the entire space a cozy, intimate feel. The audience, a mix of longtime fans and curious newcomers, was eager to see the chemistry between the two stars, who had shared the screen in some of Hollywood's most iconic films. This wasn't just another talk show appearance. This special segment had been carefully crafted to celebrate the duo's years of friendship and professional collaboration. Keanu and Sandra were known not only for their incredible on-screen chemistry, but also for their off-screen friendship, one that had blossomed over the years. They had become more than just co-stars. They were close friends who had shared laughs, personal milestones, and unforgettable moments. The host, a charismatic figure with a knack for getting celebrities to open up, had been preparing for this moment for weeks. He knew that Keanu and Sandra had a unique dynamic, and he was excited to dive into the personal side of their friendship. As the cameras rolled, the host led the conversation, focusing on the lighter aspects of their lives, fun anecdotes, behind the scenes, stories, and the bond they shared over the years. Keanu, who was known for his calm demeanor and humility, had always preferred to stay out of the spotlight when it came to personal praise. He wasn't the type of celebrity to bask in adoration or show off his achievements. Instead, he often deflected attention from himself, choosing to highlight the efforts of those around him. And so, when the host asked, "Keanu, you've been called one of the most down-to-earth celebrities in Hollywood. How do you stay so grounded given the fame and fortune you've amassed?" The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his answer. Keanu gave his signature modest chuckle and looked down for a moment, seemingly collecting his thoughts. Then, with a calm and genuine expression, he spoke. "I don't think it's about fame or fortune," he began, his voice steady but full of warmth. "It's about doing the right thing and recognizing that none of this lasts forever. You can't let the world's idea of success define who you are." He paused, meeting the host's gaze. "It's about remembering where you came from and treating people with respect. At the end of the day, it's not the accolades or the awards that matter. It's the people you've helped along the way and the impact you've made." Sandra, sitting beside him, couldn't help but smile proudly. She had seen Keanu's humility firsthand and had watched him stay true to his values despite the incredible success he'd achieved. It wasn't always easy to stay grounded in an industry that often rewarded fame and excess, but Keanu had managed to do so. Sandra leaned in slightly, her smile widening as she looked at him. She was clearly proud of the man he was, both on and off screen. Keanu's words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom had grown up watching him in movies like The Matrix and Speed. Keanu was more than just an action star to them. He was someone they admired not only for his acting, but for his ability to remain authentic in a world that often felt fake. His unassuming nature, despite his fame, made him stand out in Hollywood. The host, now clearly impressed by Keanu's perspective, nodded thoughtfully. "You've always been someone who keeps it real," he said. "And that humility is so rare in today's industry. But there's also something else that's part of your persona, your kindness. It's well known that you've done a lot of charitable work, often anonymously. Can you talk a little about that? Keanu didn't hesitate. I don't believe in doing things for the recognition, he said simply. There are people out there who need help, and I'm in a position where I can do something about it. That's all there is to it. I don't need the attention or credit for it. It's just the right thing to do. The room was quiet for a moment, and even Sandra, ever the lively and witty character, seemed deeply moved by Keanu's words. She had always known that Keanu didn't seek the spotlight for his good deeds, but hearing him speak about it so plainly reminded her of the true depth of his character. She turned to him with a knowing smile, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. You know, she said, you're like the secret superhero of Hollywood. You do so many good things, but you never want anyone to know about it. Keanu smiled, but it wasn't a smile born from pride. It was a smile of understanding, a recognition that the act of helping others didn't require recognition. I guess that's the difference, he said, looking at Sandra. Doing the right thing is its own reward. The host, now clearly moved by the sincerity in the room, gave a small nod of agreement. Keanu, Sandra, you both remind us of what's truly important: kindness, humility, and using your platform for good. It's refreshing to hear someone like you speak so honestly about what really matters. Sandra, who had been listening intently, added, I think the world needs more people like Keanu. It's easy to get caught up in the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, but when you strip it all away, what's left is how you treat others. And Keanu does that better than anyone I know. The conversation flowed naturally after that, with Sandra and Keanu sharing stories of their time working together. They laughed about the challenges they faced on set, the behind-the-scenes moments that never made it into the movies, and the bond they had developed over the years. But beneath the light-hearted banter, there was a deeper current of mutual respect and admiration, a recognition that their friendship was built on shared values, honesty, and a commitment to making the world a better place. As the interview wrapped up, the host turned to the camera and addressed the audience directly. Tonight, we've heard from two of Hollywood's finest, but more than that, we've heard from two people who remind us of what really matters in life: kindness, humility, and treating others with respect. Keanu and Sandra, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us tonight. The audience erupted into applause, and Keanu and Sandra shared a quiet, knowing smile. They knew that their conversation had touched more than just the audience in the studio. It had resonated with people watching from home, reminding them that true success wasn't measured by fame or wealth, but by the positive impact you had on others. And as the cameras stopped rolling and the lights dimmed, Keanu and Sandra walked off the set, knowing they had shared something far more meaningful than any movie they could ever make. It was a message that transcended the world of film, a message about being real, staying grounded, and always striving to make the world a little better than you found it. But then, just as the conversation seemed to be flowing smoothly, something unexpected happened. The host, eager to keep the mood light and entertaining, turned towards Sandra and asked with a grin, You and Keanu have been friends for so long. Have there ever been any awkward moments between you two? Sandra, ever the professional, chuckled and leaned back in her chair, clearly gearing up to share one of their funny behind-the-scenes stories. She had plenty to choose from, given their long history together. But just as she opened her mouth to speak, Keanu, who was usually the quieter, more reserved one of the pair, suddenly interjected. His expression shifted from the usual relaxed demeanor to something more serious, his brow furrowing slightly. There was one time, Keanu said, his voice unexpectedly somber. The tone of the room changed almost instantly. Sandra's playful smile faded, replaced with a look of curiosity and concern. The audience, who had been anticipating another lighthearted moment, suddenly felt the shift in the atmosphere. The air was heavy with anticipation. What was Keanu about to say? Sandra, clearly caught off guard, sat up straighter in her chair. She wasn't sure what Keanu was referencing, but she knew it must be important. She raised an eyebrow, her usual confidence now replaced by genuine curiosity. What are you talking about? She asked. her voice still light but with a hint of uncertainty. The playful energy from before had now dissipated, replaced by a quiet tension. Keanu took a deep breath, the kind of breath someone takes when they are about to say something meaningful, something they've been holding on to for a long time. For a moment, the room fell into a heavy silence as Keanu gathered his thoughts. This was not the Keanu anyone had expected to see today. The laid-back, humble movie star was gone, replaced by a man who was clearly wrestling with something much deeper. I once told Sandra that I thought we were meant to do more with our platform than just entertain, Keanu said slowly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I said that we had a responsibility to help others not just in our movies but in real life. And that responsibility is heavy. I didn't know if I was ready for it, but I knew it was something we both felt. The words hung in the air, heavier than the usual playful banter that had filled the interview just moments ago. Sandra, who had been prepared to share a funny story, was now faced with an entirely different side of Keanu. The realization hit her almost immediately. She had known Keanu for years, but hearing him speak so openly about the weight of their public personas, about the responsibility they carried as role models, was a reminder of just how seriously he took the position he held in the world. For a brief moment, the host seemed unsure of how to proceed. His usual charisma had faltered and he simply sat back, processing what Keanu had just shared. Sandra, too, sat in silence for a few seconds, letting the gravity of his words settle in. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability in his voice, and the honesty in his expression. It was a side of Keanu that few people outside his close circle had ever seen. It wasn't the action star, the beloved celebrity, or even the quiet guy everyone thought they knew. It was a moment of raw humanity, and Sandra, who had worked with Keanu on multiple films, had never seen him like this before. Sandra's face softened as she looked at Keanu, understanding where he was coming from. She had always admired his humility, but this was different. This was about more than just being a good person in the public eye. It was about understanding the deeper impact they had as public figures and the responsibility that came with their fame. She had often joked with him about his willingness to do good in the world, but she now realized how much this weighed on him. Keanu's words had changed the dynamic of the entire conversation. The audience, sensing the shift in energy, fell, silent, hanging on every word. This wasn't just another celebrity interview, this was a real, raw moment of reflection. For once, the celebrity facade was gone, replaced by an authentic conversation about the weight of fame and the need for kindness in a world that often seemed to value success above all else. There are days when it feels overwhelming, Keanu continued, his voice quieter now, filled with a sense of introspection. We are in a position where we can do so much more than entertain people. We have the power to influence, to help, and to make a real difference. And sometimes that feels like a responsibility I wasn't prepared for. But it's a responsibility I've learned to embrace. We both have, I think. Sandra, now fully understanding the depth of Keanu's words, nodded slowly. She had always known Keanu was a kind and thoughtful person, but hearing him express these thoughts so openly made her realize just how much weight he carried on his shoulders. She placed her hand on his, a gesture of support, and smiled warmly at him. You've always been about doing the right thing, Keanu, she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. You've always cared about others, and I've seen that time and time again. I'm just glad that we're both on the same page about this. We do have a platform, and it's up to us to use it for something greater than ourselves. The audience, who had been quiet up until that point, slowly began to react. A murmur of approval rippled through the room, and some even stood, applauding the sincerity of the moment. The host, who had been quiet during the exchange, finally spoke, his voice filled with admiration. You know, I think a lot of people forget that celebrities are just people too. But you two, you've just reminded everyone watching of the real power of kindness, humility, and doing what's right. Sandra turned to the host, a small laugh escaping her lips. It's funny, she said. We came here to promote a movie, but I think we've ended up having a much more important conversation. She glanced at Keanu, her smile growing. And that's the kind of thing that matters, right? Keanu, smiled, his usual calm demeanor returning. Exactly. It's not about the movies. It's about the impact we have on people's lives. That's the real legacy. As the conversation shifted back to lighter topics, the audience was left with something more than just entertainment. They had witnessed a moment of true vulnerability, one that showcased not just the kindness of Keanu Reeves, but the power of using one's platform for good. For Sandra, the conversation was a reminder of how fortunate she was to have a friend like Keanu, and for the audience, it was a powerful lesson in humility, responsibility, and the importance of kindness in a world that often feels divided. And, as the cameras rolled on, the message lingered in the air. Being kind, humble, and true to yourself wasn't just the right thing to do. It was the most important thing of all. As Keanu spoke, the host, who was usually quick with his responses, found himself at a complete loss for words. His usual sharp wit and fast comebacks had evaporated, leaving him in an unexpected silence. He sat back in his chair, visibly stunned, trying to process the unexpected depth of the conversation. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. This was something more profound, something that went beyond the surface of fame, beyond the glittering lights of Hollywood. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted. What had begun as a light-hearted and easy conversation now felt like a moment of reckoning, one that resonated far deeper than any scripted question. Keanu, unfazed by the host's stunned silence, continued speaking, his voice low but steady, almost meditative. I think we sometimes forget that we have an opportunity, not just to entertain but to inspire, he said, his gaze shifting between Sandra and the host. We have a platform, not just for telling stories on screen, but for showing people what really matters. Kindness, compassion, and doing the right thing. Those things are just as important as the movies we make. It's about using what we have to make a difference even in small ways. There was a noticeable pause after Keanu's words. The room, which had been filled with laughter and light-hearted banter just moments before, was now wrapped in a heavy silence. Keanu's words weren't meant to be just another nice sentiment. They were a quiet but powerful call to action. A reminder that there was more to life than the superficial, more to their positions as public figures than the fame and fortune that often consumed them. I know it's a lot to carry, Keanu continued, his voice softening even further. But I can't shake the feeling that it's something I need to do. I can't just go on making movies and pretending like it's all that matters. I'm in a position where I can help people, where I can do more than just entertain, and I feel like it's something I have to take seriously. Sandra, sitting beside him, was quiet for a moment as she took in what Keanu had said. It was clear that his words had struck a chord with her as well. Over the years, she had witnessed Keanu's deep sense of responsibility, his desire to use his influence for something greater than personal gain. But to hear him articulate it so plainly, to hear him acknowledge the weight of it, was something else entirely. Her eyes softened as she placed a hand gently on his arm, her voice filled with tenderness. Keanu, you've always been that way, she said, her words full of warmth. You care about people, and that's what makes you who you are. But you don't have to carry the world on your shoulders. Just being you is enough. That's what inspires people. There was a moment of stillness as Sandra's words hung in the air. It was clear that she was speaking from the heart, trying to reassure him that his actions, his kindness, were already making a difference. It wasn't about bearing the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was about being true to himself, and that, in itself, was enough to inspire those around him. Sandra knew that the world didn't need more perfect people. It needed real people who cared, who tried their best to do right by others. And Keanu had always been that person. But the host, still stunned by the depth of the conversation, finally found his voice again. It was barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say to that, he said, almost defeated by the rawness of Keanu's honesty. The host had been prepared for a fun, entertaining chat between two Hollywood icons, but what had transpired was far more impactful, far more meaningful than anyone had expected. The silence in the studio was palpable. The audience, who had come in expecting the usual celebrity banter, were now faced with something far more profound. They had come to see the stars of their favorite movies joke and laugh, but instead, they were witnessing a moment of real connection, a moment where vulnerability and honesty were laid bare. No one in the studio knew exactly how to respond, because what they had just heard wasn't something that could easily be put into words. Keanu's calm demeanor, his ability to speak so openly about something so personal, had caught everyone off guard. It wasn't that he was afraid to speak his mind, it was that he wasn't speaking for the applause or for the praise. He wasn't trying to be a hero, he was simply sharing his truth, the truth that had guided him through his career and personal life. It was a truth rooted in kindness, in recognizing the importance of compassion, and in understanding that their influence as public figures came with a responsibility. The host, still trying to process the moment, cleared his throat. "Well, I think we've just had one of the most unexpected moments of this show," he said, his voice slightly shaky. "What you just said, Keanu, is a reminder to all of us that the way we treat others and the responsibility we have to use our platforms for good is what really matters. I think this is a lesson we all need to hear." Keanu, ever humble, simply nodded, offering a small but genuine smile. "It's something we all have to remember," he said quietly. "It's easy to get caught up in the noise, but it's the quiet moments, the small acts of kindness that make the real difference." The host, now visibly moved, turned to the audience, who were also struck by the sincerity of the conversation. "Let's all take a moment to think about what Keanu just said," the host said, his voice filled with respect. "In a world where we often focus on success, fame, and accolades, it's important to remember that what truly matters is how we treat each other. It's kindness, compassion, and doing the right thing. Those are the things that make a real impact." The audience nodded, and many stood to applaud, not just the stars on stage, but the powerful message they had just shared. As the applause continued, Sandra and Keanu exchanged a quiet, knowing glance. They had come on the show to promote their latest projects, but they had ended up sharing something far more meaningful, something that would stay with the audience long after the cameras stopped rolling. The host closed the segment, offering a final thought. "Tonight, we've seen two of Hollywood's brightest stars remind us of what truly matters. And I think we'll all walk away from this conversation with a little more kindness in our hearts." As the cameras faded to black, the impact of the conversation lingered. In a world full of noise, Keanu's words had cut through, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who heard them. It was a reminder that the most important thing we can do is not just entertain, but inspire. And sometimes, all it takes is a moment of truth to change the world. As the silence continued, the weight of Keanu's words hung in the air, settling over the studio like a heavy but necessary truth. The host, still processing the depth of the conversation, finally gathered his thoughts. He sat up a little straighter, his usual charismatic energy tempered with a newfound respect for what had just transpired. "Keanu," he began, his voice filled with admiration, "what you just said, I think it's something we all needed to hear. I know I wasn't expecting this kind of conversation today, but maybe that's the point. Maybe we need to stop and reflect more on what we can do with the platforms we've been given." Keanu nodded slowly, his expression softening into a faint but sincere smile. There was a humility in his demeanor, a quiet acknowledgement that the conversation had taken an unexpected turn. "Sometimes, we all need to be reminded that there's more to life than the surface," he said quietly, his voice steady and thoughtful. "And sometimes the toughest things we can do are the ones that don't show up in the headlines or on the big screen. It's the little moments of kindness and understanding that really matter." The host, moved by Keanu's words, nodded, in agreement, clearly affected by the shift in tone. There was a shift in the studio as well. The energy had changed from light-hearted banter to something deeper, something more introspective. The audience, who had come expecting the usual celebrity interview, had now been invited into a moment of vulnerability and reflection that had a far-reaching impact. They were no longer just spectators. They were participants in a conversation about the deeper responsibilities that come with fame and influence. Sandra, sitting beside Keanu, felt a similar sense of quiet reflection. She knew that Keanu had always been one to think deeply about life, but hearing him speak so openly about his personal thoughts on kindness and responsibility reminded her of why she admired him so much. She wasn't about to let the moment pass without contributing her own perspective. "I think what Keanu's saying is that we all have the power to make a difference," Sandra added, her voice gentle but firm. "It doesn't matter how big or small, as long as it's genuine." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. It's easy to think that we need to make grand gestures to have an impact, but sometimes it's the smallest acts that have the most profound effects. A simple smile, a helping hand, a listening ear, those things matter. Those things can change the world, one person at a time. The host sat quietly for a moment, taking in Sandra's words. He glanced over at the audience, many of whom were nodding in agreement. The conversation had taken a turn, not just toward a discussion of fame and responsibility, but toward a broader reflection on humanity and the power each individual has to shape the world around them. The typical talk show energy had given way to something much more profound, and it was clear that everyone in the studio was feeling the shift. "I think you're both right," the host finally said, his voice quieter now, more reflective. "It's easy to get caught up in the idea that we have to do something huge to make a difference. But the reality is it's often the small things, the things that don't get noticed, that have the biggest impact. The kindness we show, the support we offer, the way we treat each other, those are the things that matter the most." Keanu nodded once more, his expression thoughtful. "Exactly," he said. "The world can feel like it's constantly moving at a fast pace, and it's easy to get caught up in the noise. But sometimes, the most important thing we can do is just slow down, take a breath, and remember that it's the little things that make a difference. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be real and kind." Sandra smiled, clearly moved by the conversation. "You know, I think we all need to hear that more often," she said. "The world doesn't need perfection. It needs authenticity. It needs real people who care, who show up for each other, and who do their best every day. It's not about being flawless. It's about being human." The host, now visibly moved, looked directly into the camera and spoke to the audience at home. "Tonight, we've heard something truly special. Keanu and Sandra have reminded us all that the things that really matter aren't the things we see on the red carpet or in the headlines. It's the kindness, the understanding, the small acts of love that we give to each other. Those are the things that truly make a difference in the world." The studio erupted into applause, not just for Keanu and Sandra, but for the powerful message they had shared. The atmosphere in the room was different now. There was no longer a sense of celebrity or performance. There was only a sense of shared humanity and a collective understanding that each of us, in our own way, can make the world a better place by simply choosing to be kind. As the applause died down, Keanu turned to Sandra and gave her a small, appreciative smile. "You've always been a voice of reason, Sandra," he said, his tone soft. "You remind me that kindness is the greatest strength we can have." Sandra returned his smile, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And you remind me that it's not about being perfect. It's about being real. That's what I admire most about you, Keanu." The host, who had been watching the exchange between the two friends, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration for both of them. They had come on the show to promote their work, but instead, they had shared something far more meaningful, something that transcended the world of entertainment. As the segment wrapped up, the host looked out at the audience one last time. "Tonight we've learned that the true power of fame isn't in the movies we make or the headlines we generate. It's in the kindness we offer, the lives we touch, and the positive change we create. Thank you, Keanu and Sandra, for reminding us of what truly matters." The audience applauded once more, their hearts a little fuller, their minds a little clearer. And as the cameras faded to black, the message lingered in the air. Kindness, compassion, and authenticity. Those were the things that made the real difference in the world. And in a world that often seems divided, those small acts of love and Understanding might just be the key to bringing people together. The conversation shifted once again, as the host, who had been momentarily speechless, regained his usual charm. He leaned forward, his eyes filled with admiration for Keanu and Sandra. "Well, I think you've just set the bar for what a great interview should be," he said, his voice warm and genuine. The words were met with a ripple of applause from the audience, who had been captivated by the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. What Keanu and Sandra have shared today isn't just about movie stars. It's about being good humans, doing the right thing, and using what we have to help others. The host's words resonated deeply with the people in the studio. This wasn't the usual celebrity banter or the flashy, superficial conversations audiences were accustomed to during celebrity interviews. No, what Keanu and Sandra had just shared was much more personal, raw, and impactful. They had spoken not about their fame or the accolades they had earned, but about the responsibility they felt to use their platforms for good, to remind people of the importance of kindness, humility, and compassion. As the host turned back to the audience, the applause grew louder, and it was clear that the energy in the room had shifted. This wasn't just a standing ovation for two Hollywood stars. It was a recognition of something deeper. The applause wasn't for their movies, their looks, or their fame, but for the genuine exchange of wisdom and humanity that had unfolded in front of them. The audience, who had come expecting a typical celebrity interview, had been treated to a profound reminder of what truly matters in life. Keanu and Sandra, both humbled by the response, exchanged a quiet look. It was a look that spoke volumes, a look that said they knew they had shared something much more important than any scripted question or promotional talk. They had just reminded everyone in the room, and millions at home, that greatness doesn't lie in being perfect or achieving worldly success. It lies in how we use our lives and our influence to make the world a better place, no matter how small the effort may seem. The show was wrapping up, and the host took a moment to reflect. "Today we learned that greatness isn't about being perfect," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity that matched the depth of the conversation. "It's about using what we have to make the world a better place." Keanu and Sandra, thank you for reminding us of that. The audience cheered, not just for the stars, but for the message they had imparted. The host's final words hung in the air, lingering long after the applause faded. He had struck the essence of the conversation perfectly. True greatness is measured not by fame, fortune, or perfection, but by how we choose to act with kindness and compassion, especially when no one is watching. As the show ended, the applause continued, but it wasn't just for the usual celebrity moments or performances. It was a recognition of something much more meaningful. Keanu and Sandra had opened up in a way that few others would, sharing their vulnerabilities and the lessons they had learned over their years of experience in the public eye. They had proven that you could be a star and still remain deeply connected to your humanity. They had shown that kindness and selflessness aren't just admirable qualities, they are essential. In the quiet that followed the applause, the lights began to dim, and the cameras slowly shut off. Keanu and Sandra sat in their chairs, still processing the impact of the conversation. The energy in the room had shifted completely. What had started as a lighthearted interview about their films and experiences had turned into a moment of profound reflection, one that would stay with everyone in that studio long after the credits rolled. It was a moment that reminded the audience, both in the studio and at home, of something fundamental. We all have the power to influence the world around us. Fame and fortune may provide us with platforms, but it's how we use those platforms that truly defines us. The responsibility to be kind, to show compassion, and to act with integrity is something that comes with that influence, and it's something we must all take seriously. As Keanu and Sandra stood up and made their way off the set, the host watched them leave with a sense of awe. He had hosted countless interviews, but this one stood out. It wasn't just the usual banter or scripted responses. It was real. It was raw. And it had reminded everyone in that room, including himself, of the importance of using our influence to make the world a better place. For Keanu and Sandra, the message was clear. They didn't need to be perfect, and neither did anyone else. What mattered was doing their best, being kind to others and staying true to themselves. In a world that often seemed obsessed with superficial success, this was a reminder that there was more to life than just what met the eye. The show had ended, but the conversation would continue in the minds and hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. The message was simple, yet powerful. True influence comes not from the spotlight, but from how we choose to use our time, our words, and our actions to make a positive impact on the world. And that, sometimes, is the most inspiring thing of all. As the cameras shut off and the crew began to pack up, Keanu and Sandra shared a moment of quiet reflection. They knew that, in a world full of noise, they had just added a quiet but meaningful message that would echo in the hearts of many. And perhaps that was the most lasting impact they could leave behind.